Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Welcome to Window on the West. I'm here along with Michael Grumbine and Dan Coates, and welcome to our very first episode reading through the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion is a really dense book with lots of names and locations, relationships that are kind of tough to get through, and that's why we're going to do this slowly, deliberately, with care, but with a lot of fun. And so this is the way to think about this, being your first time listening probably to the Silmarillion here as we go through it, is this is more of a book club read-through, not a professorial read-through. So we're here to really enjoy the books. We're not here to make it a history lesson that requires you to know who's who and what's what. But we will be pointing out the things that we love, the things that confused us, the things that made us stop for a minute and think harder. And so we hope you enjoy this. We hope that you're here along for the ride for the whole way through. This is going to take a while, but we're really going to have a good time. And today we're going to be reading, we're going through Ainulindalë, which is Tolkien's creation myth. And before we do, I thought, guys, I pulled out some interesting things about this, which I think mostly came from the Tolkien Gateway site, which is a great place if you're looking for some facts and some quick overviews of different things that you're reading through, characters and events and things like that. So I looked up Ainulindalë, and what's interesting is that it was first composed when he was 27 or 28 in 1918 to 1920, somewhere around there. And then he rewrote it again in the 30s, and then he rewrote it again in 1948, and then he rewrote it again in 1951. And according to Christopher Tolkien, it's one of the only parts of the Silmarillion where he actually went like manuscript to manuscript, where he didn't put it down for a long time and then completely rewrite it, which meant he would change names and characters and relationships and things like that. Whereas now with this here really had a direct, like first draft, second draft, third draft type of approach to it. And in case this is now getting a little bit deeper, according to Tolkien and according to, I think it was in the Book of Lost Tales, that this here, the Ainulindalë was written by Rumil, one of those names that are always hard to pronounce, who was the first elf to actually invent writing. He was the one who put down words, and then Fëanor improved them. But this is so not only is it the creation myth and the very beginning of everything else, it's actually the first guy who actually wrote anything. This is one of the first things he ever wrote down, which I thought was interesting. So with that in mind, let's dive in, guys. What are your first thoughts of Ainulindalë?
To me, one of the themes that has always stood out with the Ainulindalë is Tolkien is recognized as being one of the more creative minds in terms of literature. He mostly, he is the main author of what the subgenre we now call fantasy. He was one of the earliest and primary authors of the fantasy subgenre. And so his mind is very creative, his world is creative, but when it came to the Ainulindalë, what's very interesting to me is it's clearly a version for his world of the story of Genesis, at least the underpinnings of Genesis, I should say, because obviously all of the stuff that happens with the Ainur and the music itself, there are tremendous differences, but in the sense that there is one creator who creates all things. Their angelic beings are created before the world, and then you have the world created. Now, the way Tolkien has the world created is very interesting. But so the thing that's always stood out to me, which is kind of fascinating, is do we find it to be lacking in creativity that Tolkien, when he goes to his creation story, basically lifts from the Judeo-Christian model, at least from its primary underpinnings, to make his creation story, or not?
I mean, there are other creation stories that I guess they what is it, I can't remember which one is the world is on the back of a turtle. Is it, if it were far more directly, not allegorical, but a direct descendant of it, like you would actually see the direct relationship between 7 days, and there were 7 days. Things like that. I don't know how much you can say just because it's a creation story with a god and angels, in a sense, that it resembles what Christianity has in its creation story.
So to you, it's different enough that it might be
Yeah.
something entirely different.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like you could say, Joseph Campbell wrote the Hero with a Thousand Faces and said every hero goes through these phases. Well, then you could say everything's a copy of everything, because every hero has, starts from humble beginnings and goes through a major event, and then, eventually reaches success in these certain paths. But I don't know. I mean, every creation story has to start at nothing and end up with something. So they all have that in common, right? Ultimately.
True.
Yeah.
And what's more interesting is the things that are different. So obviously the music, right? So there's music is the theme throughout the Ainulindalë. Creation first, the music is, I mean, the Ainur don't even realize that their music that they're making is going to be used as a vision of the world to be, that is to come. But it is. And so Illúvatar, and you have the very powerful scene in the beginning where you have 3 themes of music, and you need a second and third theme because Melkor comes in with discord and tries to overpower the first existing theme. And there's a second theme that Illúvatar stands up and gives, and which is gentle, and the discord overwhelms that. And there's a third theme that he gives, which it turns out is going to be the creation of the Children of Illūvatar, and its beauty. It's said in this text is in its sadness. It has this sweet melody which is sad and beautiful, and the discord can't overcome it. It just weaves itself. It uses the discord to weave itself further and make itself something different and new, but which is not overcome. So this whole theme of music is very powerful to me, and I've always loved it. As part
Yeah,
of
I think that's something that you brought up on the B Reads, is that for Tolkien, music is in everything. The elves are always singing, Bilbo's always singing. Like there's and even the orcs in Mordor, they have their songs. I mean, it's just like like song and music are somehow interwoven into everything.
Yeah,
That
and
was
it's
very
funny.
interesting.
Like, it occurred to me, it's sort of like sound is the very first creative thing that we can do as a human being, right? You come out of the womb crying, right? That is creation in a way. That's sound. That's the very first thing that you can do. And so the very most basic form of creation or subcreation in Tolkien's terms would be creating music, or creating some sort of cohesive approach to the sound that we make. And that's,
Right.
Children learn that at the very young ages. They're creating the ability to communicate with people just by crying or by smiling or doing those little things, or laughing, the little things that are creative in that way.
Yeah, something that jumped out to me with the Ainulindalë is that kind of like what Michael was saying about how Tolkien is kind of almost going to the playbook, going to Genesis, because if you look at a lot of other creation myths, especially at the time when Moses wrote Genesis, it was a lot of things that were creating out of chaos. And Genesis, on the other hand, is all about how the one true living God created ex nihilo out of his own creative power, just by using his word, brought in to existence everything that exists. And if you looked at a lot of the creation myths that were around at that time, there was like pre-existent matter, stuff that was already there that, was either at war or, demigods fighting against other demigods. And then that collision or that chaos produced what we see now. So for me, that jumped out to me right away, that Tolkien is very much kind of putting his own faith into his own world that he's creating. That this is kind of like a way of Tolkien subcreating.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think when you go into the discord that is that is created by Melkor, it's because, let me find the quote, because he sought to be a creator, right? This is what he wrote. He had gone off, and he, being Melkor, had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame, which is the flame of creation ultimately. For desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own. And then later, Illúvatar says, "No theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me." So he's saying, like, you aren't able to create on your own. You can subcreate. You can use the things that I've given you that allow you to have a reflection of my creation, but you can't create. And Melkor's goal, in the same way that, I guess, the Satan Melkor parallel is there for certain, but he sought to take power unto himself, and by doing that, he sowed discord and distrust and things meant for disaster that ultimately were still, were turned in some ways to the good, into the creation that Illúvatar had set before them.
Yeah, that's
right. It's that last thing that you said that it's always so fascinating, where Tolkien is explicitly putting in the text. He does it. He says it. Illúvatar says it directly to Melkor when Melkor is singing discord, or after he does that. He says, everything that you have done, you'll see that it'll be used to the glory of the whole. And in other words, it can't wreck it. And then he goes on and points out in specific to Ulmo at the end of the Ainulindalë. He points out an example of how what Melkor apparently brings is extreme heat and extreme cold, whether you're talking about his glance or even in the formation of Ea, of the world itself. And so Illúvatar goes and points out to Ulmo, Lord of the Waters, that the extreme heat and extreme cold of Melkor produces the beauty of the snowflakes, and then from the evaporation of the oceans, the gentle rains that come back down, so that something more beautiful is brought out of the ocean from Melkor's discord.
How do you guys feel about this in particular? This idea that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. This idea that, it seems like for Tolkien, for Illúvatar, that it's almost like everything is predestined, that everything that we read later on, say in The Lord of the Rings, it's something that was already sung about. So how does that go into free will? How does that go into, maybe my mind's the only one that went there. Yeah. That's what jumped out to me reading this, is that even Illúvatar, right? I should say Illúvatar even turns Melkor and uses Melkor to make a story that is made better in the end for a more ultimate good.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, right, they witness this creation as a vision, but not as natural creation to begin with. It is, and so first they hear it, they don't have any sight, they don't have any vision at all. Illúvatar grants them the vision, and they see this vision of the world, and they see the elves, and they see the history unfolding before them, kind of like looking at a timeline, and you can kind of see it from start to finish, kind of in a third person perspective kind of way. But it's all taken away, and he makes the point. I'm trying to find the quote right now. Maybe one of you have it, where they don't know the end of all things still, right? They have an understanding. And so it's sort of like, this is what you can create if my music is brought to fruition. I don't know if it's saying that everything is set in motion and this is the way it is.
So the Ainur split after the music is made and after Illúvatar reveals the vision to them of what the world is to be, the world that is to be, I should say. And they split, and the ones that desire to go into the world and enter it, those are the Valar. So they have a new name now.
Right.
And presumably there are Ainur who do not just presumably, he says so. But he says two things to build on what you were saying, Jonathan. He says, but when the Valar entered into Ea, they were first astounded and then at a loss, for it was as if naught was yet made, which they had seen in vision. And all was but on point to begin, and yet unshaped, and it was dark. To which my mind went, you mean formless and void?
Right. Okay.
So with the addition of the great music, then they begin the work of shaping. And then the part you were talking about, where it says that they didn't know the end of things, was somewhere else. It does say that basically that the music was almost unfinished in a sense, and it was theirs to finish. And so there are parts of the themes later on that they didn't fully see or understand. And they're especially taken with the children of Illúvatar, right?
Yeah.
That's the reason. It says explicitly that is why the Ainur who become the Valar seek to enter the world, because they want to unfold and prepare this world for the children of Illúvatar. And so, who are the subject of Illúvatar's third theme of music? There are three themes in the music, and the children of Illúvatar the third. And so it's really interesting that they don't see all ends, so to speak, with regard to the children. And we'll see that more and more throughout the Silmarillion. There will be references to the gaps in knowledge of the Valar, mighty though they are.
Yeah, it sort of opens up the whole conversation of why is it that the Valar needed to be appealed to in order to actually take part in the history of Middle Earth in a way, right? Outside of their thrones, essentially. And here it's because maybe they love them and they're like the children who you love, but man, they just are going awry, and like maybe they just need to learn on their own. But then you see that anyway, it brings up a whole conversation about how much do they really know and how much do they not know. They know the road that they're on, but they don't know all the sights that they'll see along the way. There are new things that happen, and there are things that surprise them, but things that don't surprise them. It's an interesting discussion.
I think the part that Michael was touching on there about how the Valar, let's see, it's towards the end where it says, even as Olmos spoke, this is on page 19, and while the Ainur were yet gazing upon this vision, it was taken away and hidden from their sight. And it seemed to them that in a moment they perceived a new thing, darkness, which they had not known before except in thought. But they had become enamored of the beauty of the vision, engrossed in the unfolding of the world which came there to being, and their minds were filled with it. For the history was incomplete, and the circles of time not full wrought, when the vision was taken away. And some have said that the vision ceased ere the fulfillment of the dominion of men and the fading of the firstborn. Wherefore, though the music is over all, the Valar have not seen, as with sight, the later ages or the ending of the world. And I kind of took that to mean that the music has played, the music has gone to the end and finished, but the Valar themselves, they like when I think earlier on when they're singing their parts, and then they start getting together into groups and they start singing together, and then they start making harmonies, and they don't even know what they're singing to begin with. And I found that was kind of interesting that the Valar don't know, but I think it's very clear for Tolkien that Illúvatar knows, and he knows the beginning from the end.
Yeah, and remember, the Valar don't know what happens to men. It's interesting, but they do know. The one thing that still strikes me is they do know that there is, there will be a last battle in the end, right? And this is going forward into, which is what I think what Tolkien referred to as the probably closest thing is Ragnarok, the Norse myth of the end of the world. But here they know it's called the Dagor when Melkor walks the door of night, and there's a great final battle, and they know that's coming, but they still don't know those things along the way, I guess.
What I love as a kind of interesting, I don't want to say counterpoint, but I'll say it that way, to what Dan was saying about the predestined nature of things, is that one of the interesting things about Tolkien's creation story is that Illúvatar clearly puts a tremendous emphasis on the choice of the Valar in their to do their part in the subcreation. It says specifically that he hearkens to them. So he just sort of sits at first and listens to them sing, and he uses their song. He doesn't control their song. He uses it. In fact, we know he doesn't control it because they develop these new melodies, and Melkor comes up with his own stuff, which sows discord. And Illúvatar stands and interjects 2 other times because of that. So he isn't controlling Melkor or the others, the other harmonies. He's listening. He's hearkening to them, and then of course adding in what they never guessed was that he would add in through the flame imperishable actual life and actual creation from their music. But their music is freely chosen.
in the same way, it makes you right. The only way that true creation happens is through Illúvatar, right? Through the creation of Ea and Arda, and this might be moving forward a little bit, but it's kind of the same thing that happens with Aule and the dwarves in the creation of those. We can get into that at that point, so that we don't want to get into the details of that right now. But it's an interesting parallel right there.
The great elf versus dwarf debate. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I thought, we've talked about the flame imperishable a few times, which, just so that everybody knows, it harkens directly to Gandalf when he says, "I'm a servant of the secret fire."
Right.
When he talks to the Balrog, and that secret fire is the, Illúvatar. And I always loved how when I first read this, that occurred to me, and I was like, oh, wow, that just ties everything together right away. And I love that part of this.
Yeah.
There's immediate connection between Lord of the Rings and some.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty clearly the consensus on the secret fire part.
So what's interesting, another thing that was interesting to me is the concentration that's put on water and the sea. What is it so much? And I don't know. Maybe you guys caught it or your other readings, but what is it about the sea? Why is the sea even right here? Right, it's obviously important to the elves, but he makes it a point. Is it because, like you said, Michael, you think that it is that those two counterpoints of the hot and the cold, what happens with water, and the beauty of the rain and the ice and the heat and the cold? Like, is that it, or what is it about the water? Just, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question.
He said
it's really interesting because Ulmo, Lord of the Waters, brother of is the only one that I think that Illúvatar talks to directly, besides Melkor in this. Speaks individually, I should say, besides Melkor. He speaks directly to all of them, but as far as individually called out. And so the waters are just there's such a potent theme in Tolkien, almost like they have their own music. The elves are always listening, right? I just read the part where Legolas says that, mentions that to the company as they're traveling, that he's never seen the sea, but that he hears it calling to him. And that the elves sometimes lose themselves on the shores.
I just reread this quote that I had underlined, and I think I just kind of missed it the first time. So let me read it here and see if it kind of sticks out to you, because he wrote, and it is said by the Eldar that in water there lives yet the echo of the music of the Ainur, more than in any substance else that is in this earth, and many of the children of Illúvatar hearken still unsated to the voices of the sea, and yet not know for what they listen. So it's the music is in the water. There we go.
There we go.
Put the question down, but the answer was right in my face.
So that wasn't a rhetorical question.
Sorry, that was not a rhetorical question. No, I was just I was reading it for the joy of it, and I just kind of missed that. Wow. So the you don't think of water as musical necessarily, though certainly Tolkien does. But it is brash, abrasive, but it can certainly also be beautiful. And I like that. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and so we have air, water, and earth mentioned with the three.
It's not a band.
Manwē, Ulmo, and Aule.
Earth, wind, and fire.
Thanks, Dan. Yes.
Another music reference, perhaps.
Yeah. There you go. I thought it was interesting too. They have that, but then Melkor is just the Lord of Darkness ultimately. Or Lord of Destruction, but his brother, right, in the mind of Illúvatar was Manwē, which is an interesting thing, because I guess the two most powerful, I would guess, or the two most, perhaps the most, the parts that influenced the song the most is maybe the best way of saying it. I don't know, that those two were the ones that created most, even though Manwē isn't really mentioned in that, but perhaps that's why they were seen as brothers in that sense, because their subcreation was greater than the others. I don't know.
Yeah, he specifically says that Manwē was, quote, the noblest of the Ainur. So there's that, and Aule is the greatest in skill and knowledge. But he says scarce less than to Melkor. So it's interesting because Melkor and Aule share something, which we'll see later. Some hints of, but. They have some differences too in how they approach making. I loved the part when Illúvatar reveals the world that will be created from the music, and the Ainur are all shocked. And then it says that that they entered.
Is this where Tolkien is very binary?
Oh, geez, I had that. Yeah, don't listen. Not yet, Dan. Too soon. Too soon.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
Well, I can't find the
see what-
quote, but I'll say it that basically all of them entered the world. The ones who became enamored, they became enamored of the children of Illúvatar. That was the thing that surprised them the most, was that there would be new sparks of life,
I think I
new
have the quote.
thinking, and free willy creatures with will, and that the desire to prepare the world for those creatures was what drove the Ainur who became the Valar to come down into the world. That they were so excited to prepare the world for and Melkor, and that Melkor even fooled himself, it says, to thinking that was his purpose, was that he was going to go down and he was going to tame the extreme heat and cold that he had wrought into the music, for the purposes of preparing the world for the children. That he had even fooled himself.
Yeah.
And then it quickly says, but that wasn't his real purpose. His real purpose was to dominate them.
Here's the quote. It's and he feigned even to himself at first that he desired to go thither to Arda and order all things for the good of the children of Illúvatar, controlling the turmoils of the heat and the cold that had come to pass through him. But he desired rather to subdue to his will both elves and men, envying the gifts with which Illúvatar promised to endow them. And he wished himself to have subjects and servants and to be called Lord and to be master over other worlds. Yeah. Dan, I think this is an interesting quote, Dan, that you brought up a little bit ago, which has been used lately to point out that Tolkien clearly thought gender was fluid.
Do people bring up this text in that way?
It has been brought up recently, both on Twitter and in I can't remember which article it was. I don't think it was Variety.
That Tolkien was woke, and this is how.
This is how. So the quote is this. This is talking about the Valar coming to Arda. But when they desire to clothe themselves, the Valar take upon them forms, some as of male and some as of female. That for that difference of temper they had even from their beginning. But it is but bodied forth in the choice of each, not made by the choice, even as with us male and female may be shown by the raiment, but is not made thereby.
And people conclude from this what exactly?
Gender is fluid.
It kind of sounds like he's saying the opposite.
Yes,
it's not made by the choice. It's even as with male and female, you put on different types of clothes, but that doesn't make you something that you're not.
I know. It's funny. They stop at the semicolon, which is, but when they desire to clothe themselves, the Valar take upon them forms, some as male, some as female, and they don't read the rest of it.
Yeah.
Which is
the very next few words, for that difference of temper, that is the difference of temper between male and female, they had even from their beginning. In other words, although of course in body they aren't inherently male or female because they don't inherently have bodies, they nevertheless have the temper, the male or female temper. In other words, Tolkien is being more binary than you suspect. It's like he even this is the funny thing to me is the Valar, instead of being genderless, because obviously the Valar are spirits, right? They're not bodied creatures.
That's right.
But instead of going with they have no gender, he actually goes down the gender path. He says they generally appear as male and female. They even marry, whatever that means with Valar. So
that's right.
So there's a binary that he's reinforcing, even with technically genderless in the human sense creatures. So it does not prove what they think it proves. It perhaps proves the opposite.
They are who they are from the very beginning, and they were never. They never had a choice in how to change that for themselves.
Correct. And they can appear in whatever bodies they choose, but they choose to appear in the bodies when they have bodies that is according to their temper, namely their male or female temper. So I love that passage.
There's one quote. Sometimes, like when I read through this, we can get into the details of the cosmology and the relationships and the histories. Sometimes I just like to break down like exactly what Tolkien is written, because it's put so well. The prose is so well done. Like I think you've mentioned before, Michael. Like his prose is probably some of your favorite prose out of everything you've ever read. For me, certainly that's true.
Yes.
The one quote that really, really stood out to me in this read through was near the end, where he talks about Melkor and how, this is a quote he wrote, "And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold." And you can read over that quickly, but the phrase "a flame that withers with heat," right? You think of like when there's a lot of oxygen, flames get huge and get bright and everything. But when something is incredibly hot and there's a flame and a lot of heat, it actually gets smaller because it's surrounded by such utter heat. And I love that because it made me think about it for a second about how utterly piercing Melkor was with his the light of the eyes of Melkor, and how that is consuming in such a way that the heat can't, or the flame can't even grow because it is so hot in that piercing gaze.
That's right.
I just love that.
Yeah. It's lovely. His prose, we're going to say this a lot, or maybe we'll refrain from saying it too much, but this is our first episode, so I'm going to say it once to agree with you. Tolkien's prose is in the highest class of English prose that there is. He's not Shakespeare, but his prose is surprisingly clear and potent and descriptive. And like you just said, you can read over it too quickly sometimes and not appreciate it. But when you read it aloud, or when you hear it on an audiobook read aloud, it sometimes slams me. I think, whoa, yeah. I want to hear that again. Such beautiful prose.
It ends with the Valar and Melkor going head to head, and how Arda was established.
Right. And begins with battles.
Begins with battles, and we'll end with the battle, I guess, is the way of things.
With lots of battles in the middle.
So one thing that I want to kind of do each week, most weeks we'll have other things too, but a little section I like to call
If You Like Tolkien.
And this will be things from Tolkien stuff, from Lord of the Rings stuff, to maybe some other things. If you like Tolkien, this might be a good other thing to bring up. And the one thing I want to bring up today is Martin Shaw's reading of the Silmarillion. It came out in 1998, and I got it pretty much right after that on CD. It can now be gotten on Audible. I think it's like $20, or if you really want to buy the CDs, I think they're only on eBay for around $50 right now. But I really, and I don't think either of you guys have listened to it much, but Martin Shaw's voice, he has a depth, a gravity. He brings a foundational voice to this when I read it through the first time, because the first time I read it was 1999, I think it was. And listening to it was incredibly helpful for two reasons. One, it forced me to get through it, even the hard parts where I was lost. Two, it really helped with all the pronunciations, because I think we can all agree that the pronunciations are ridiculously hard sometimes, and trying to remember the differences between all the names can be really difficult. And so hearing him say it, it gave me the ability, and sometimes you lost it, but at least you got to push through, even when you were like, who is this? And you don't tend to go back and reread things, but you can kind of remember who they are once you start getting through the tales a little bit more. And it's just a great way. It's a pleasant listen. It is not too overbearing, like it's not slow. And the main sections have these little music hits at the end that I really like. So anyway, if you're finding the Silmarillion a hard read, pick this up. And if you want to, go on Audible, get the 1 month subscription, you get like the 1 credit for free, get the Silmarillion, and then cancel your Audible subscription. You can still have it in your app. So that's what I'd recommend to do.
I like that. And if there are any budding artists out there, what I will say to you is, as you read the Silmarillion, or if you just want to listen to us talk about it, stretch your artistic muscles, because so much Tolkien art, of course, naturally focuses on the Lord of the Rings. There's so much good art that can be done with regard to the Silmarillion that hasn't been done. Well,
guys, thanks again for bringing this to a close. I guess for the very first episode here, we've got quite a few left to do. Next week, we're going to be going through the Valaquenta, which is only a few pages again. It's not that long, but it's an account of Valar and the Maiar according to the Lord Guild, which is a great sort of getting a little bit deeper into the Silmarillion now, not just the wide angle of how the world was created, but who are these beings and what are their dispositions, things like that. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Take care, all.
All right.
Michael, Dan, and Jonathan want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. Visit us at theonering.com. your source for everything Tolkien, where you can comment on this episode and join the conversation. This is Austin Robertson, bidding you farewell. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.